What were you bleaching?
The reason we're all laughing there, I was holding up for people on podcasts. I'm holding up an image of I wear 2 rings on my wedding finger. It's a habit I got into. I don't know why, but the first ring was the first ring my wife gave me, and the second ring is my wedding ring, and they're both silvery stuff, and they were dirty because I've had them on for 20 years. And I put them in a glass of Coca-Cola for about maybe 3 hours, and they've just cleaned up pretty well. I thought they'd be sparkling. They're not like brand new clean, but clean enough that I do worry what my Jack and Cokes are doing.
So what else do you use Coca-Cola for? Because that's just
Jack
one.
Daniels.
God.
That's just a rare. I have little cans, because little cans of Coke are obviously the nicest. Full fat, full sugar. Just if you're going to do it right. And it's just on a rare occasion, after a few beers, if I fancy something. This is a rare occasion, guys. I'm saying once or twice a year, I might have a Jack and Coke with a lot of ice. Oh, I love it. God, I'd love one now. Anyway, we're talking about health tonight. Yes, so we are the Raw Pet Medics, guys. It is Tuesday, the 5th of November, and you're going to see us scrolling across the bottom there, patreon.com/Raw Pet Medics, where we do a little extra bit on the side after 45 minutes on Facebook. Anything you can do there, we really, really appreciate it. We're going to be here anyway, whether you can or you can't. Did anything terribly exciting happen this week, guys, before you want to get on to the main event, which is Lee Carroll?
No, but I will apologise if you hear the thunderous.
Yeah, it is fireworks night.
Do apologise.
In the UK. Yeah, so we traditionally let off fireworks and absolutely destroy the psychology of cats and dogs up and down the country.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be going straight out to my goats after this, just to make sure they're okay.
Do your goats fall over like in the movies? Do they do that?
Well, last year they aborted.
No, that's not funny at all.
Which is not funny at all.
Okay.
No, they don't look up into the sky and carry on going backwards.
What a ridiculous defense move! I mean, how is that a defense? I mean, you're definitely getting eaten. You know, it's a pointless way of protecting yourself. Playing dead. Yeah.
Okay, guys, I'm gonna bring this court to order and say that we've got really, really important stuff with Lee Carroll. Lee Carroll is a herbalist, one of the leading herbalists in the world. We met him in San Diego. He was one of the best dressed guys in the whole place, and there were some very well dressed gentlemen. I can absolutely assure you. But there he stood in all his glory, wearing very blue glasses. I seem to remember Lee, and very dapper indeed.
Got them on.
And his sartorial elegance is matched only by his profound knowledge of herbs, which is deep and broad and entertaining and educational. So, Lee, it's wonderful to have you here this evening. How are you?
I'm great, thanks, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here, and Brendan and Connor. And you forgot that you said that I had the brain the size of a planet and it was full of mushrooms.
Who said that?
You did.
I did. Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's not bad.
That's pretty good, actually.
Yeah, I was impressed. Yeah. I think you said that on a live from New Orleans.
No, there you go.
That's the one. Yes.
Okay,
indeed.
we were somewhat creative in New Orleans.
Yeah, we were. It was a creative.
And welcome to my clinic. You're in my herbal medicine clinic where I see patients right now.
That's amazing. Yeah. And it's 5 a.m. with you because you're in Australia, Lee. Is that right?
Yes, it is 5 a.m. Yeah, so
amazing.
I don't normally get up this early, but anything for you guys.
Bless you. We will return the favor. I can absolutely assure you. Lee, give us a 1-minute history of how you got to where you are now. And more importantly, give us a few minutes on what's really, really exciting you at the moment. I hear you've just started your own website, for example.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. That's a hard task in a minute. So I started in the herbal medicine industry in 1990, and I'd done a botany degree, and I was about 30, I think, in 1990, and I got the job as a production manager at a company called MediHerb in Australia, which is one of the leading practitioner brands. And that created a love affair for me of herbal medicine. And it's a long time ago now, clearly. And I was with that company up until early 2020, and then I discovered mushrooms, and I was working for a small company in Northern California, and I got to create a small line of mushroom-based products, and that introduced me to Namex, which is the parent company of Real Mushrooms, and Namex is the biggest supplier of mushroom extracts in North America. Wow. And COVID killed off that gig that I had in Northern California. I created an online course as a pivot because I wasn't able to travel. I was in the US about 100 days a year doing herbal medicine education into the practitioner community across the whole country. And I started doing the education. I created a Clubhouse channel called Myco Revolution, and that introduced me to the people from Real Mushrooms. And so I've been interacting with Sky and Adam Chilton for quite a few years. And then earlier this year, we reached an agreement where I would be the chief medical herbalist for Real Mushrooms. It was in February. And I'm loving it. It's a fantastic company, and mushrooms have really opened my eyes to a whole area of medicine that I hadn't ever looked at before. As a herbalist, I'm a bit ashamed to admit that I didn't know that much about mushrooms. And in the last 4 years, I've done an incredibly deep dive, and now it's my primary focus from an education point of view, and a much bigger thing in terms of what I do in clinic.
So does that truly move you into a medical mycologist instead of a herbalist? How does that work? How do we go? Or do you just stay herbal? Is that?
Yeah, I just stay herbal. I think herbs and fungi, fungi were considered a plant up until 1969, and they were put into their own phylum. So I think the term herbal medicine predated 1969. So I think being a herbalist does it. But being a mycologist means you study fungi and you're into their biology. And I did quite a few units of mycology in my first degree, but that certainly doesn't make me a mycologist. I do know how to use them in clinic, though, which is the important part.
It is indeed.
And tell us about your new website there, Lee, that you've got a course on there, I believe.
Yeah, so I had a couple of websites previously, and I wanted to create a school, and I didn't want it to be about me. So I called it Herba Meditari, which is, herbs and mushrooms, and to meditate and to ponder and to examine, etc. And I thought that was a great name, but it didn't resonate with people. And the branding, people know who I am, but they don't know, these obtuse names. So I combined the websites together. So I've always had Lee Carroll Herbalist. That's been my clinic website. So now I've got just the one website, and so there's information there for patients as well as practitioners, and that's where the course is based. And I'm working towards developing some patient and consumer-based courses as entry level into mushrooms, because there's just so much misinformation out there from the marketing of big corporations. It's really confusing for people.
So if people want a really good herbalist, then they can contact you at leecarrollherbalist.com.
They can, I do.
Okay, that's great. And what about, sorry.
I pay a fortune to have insurance that allows me to practice anywhere in the world.
Wow, amazing. And what about veterinary herbs, veterinary mushrooms? How do you interact with that? Were you something to do with the 5 Defenders, for example?
No, that was Real Mushrooms' first product.
Okay.
And then Rob Silver, who's the vet for Real Mushrooms, put that into, he has been on the show, put that into a smaller capsule that was more suited to pets. Okay. My entry into the veterinary world has been veterinarians coming to my herbal medicine seminars for many years. And particularly in California, I would always have maybe 10% of the audience would be veterinarians. And so I learned that particularly dogs have got very similar physiology. They don't have all of the same diseases, but if you can understand the physiology and the clinical application, it translates pretty effectively across to a canine. Less so to a cat, but still applicable.
Sure.
So for all of our listeners out there that are interested, I heard you say that we can give them a code. They can go onto the website. They can register for your courses if they've got interest and get on there. Is that right? Are we going to be able to put a post up with a code for them to get in?
That code was just going to be a special offer for you three.
I was actually going to push you and say, I don't want to pay anything. Is there okay.
Man, we need to give the listeners a bit of an insight into your course.
We'll put you on the spot.
I'll work out how to do that. The course is designed for healthcare professionals. So if you've got any veterinarians on the call, I'll give you a code that will give them a 20% discount. How's that sound?
That sounds awesome.
Amazing.
Lee, I can't imagine there's a whole lot of footage of dogs eating mushrooms out in the wild. What do you know of dogs and wolves eating mushrooms? And second of all, the incredibly unique compounds that are in mushrooms, which you can tell us about shortly. Is it that they come through the prey into the carnivore, or is it belly contents, or where are you thinking the mushrooms communicate with dogs?
That's a very good question, Connor, and I have given that quite some thought. And there are a lot of animals that eat mushrooms in the wild. So, boars eat mushrooms, deer eat mushrooms, all the rodents eat mushrooms, many primates eat mushrooms. The evidence around dogs and wolves eating mushrooms is a bit scant. So my take on this is that the humans and all animals and fungi are very closely related. We've got a common ancestor that's about 1 billion years old. So we share a lot of genetics, much more than we do with plants. Plants are more ancient. And the physiology of animals interacts very well with the chemistry that mushrooms deliver. Just like a dog never ate echinacea in the wild, but if a dog's got an immune problem, then echinacea would be really good medicine. So from that same point of view, I think that we would need to see mushrooms more as a medicine, for an animal. And when you understand the chemistry and how the chemistry of the mushroom interacts with the physiology, then you can, match up the health parameters. And I think that, in a modern world, animals have got stresses and strains on them just like we do, that they're not evolutionarily adapted to deal with. So that, animals have to deal with all of the same chemicals in the environment, for example, and, a lot of the psychosocial stresses and strains that aren't natural. And combination of herbs and mushrooms can help, ameliorate that, can help prevent stress from becoming, bigger problems. The diets that they eat, disrupt the linings of the vascular system, and there's a lot of disease processes that develop from that. So I think that probably seeing a mushroom more as a medicine rather than food.
I bet it's like CBD. Cats and dogs are far more sensitive to CBD. They need far less per kilo of body weight than we would. And when you think about it, they have a whole endocannabinoid system, receptors crying out for CBD. And while your body produces mimic-like compounds, I suspect that they would be getting CBD through their prey from the various places that we store CBD. They would eat the whole prey and benefit from it. But if that's the way you get your CBD and not direct from plants, you would be far more sensitive to the compound. So I'm sure that's the mushrooms, because deer eat a ferocious amount. I used to study the deer diets, and they would have a huge amount of mushrooms. The females particularly reproduce.
And I think that, going back on what I just said, there's a molecule in mushrooms called ergothioneine, and fungal cells control intracellular stress in the same way that animal cells control intracellular stress. It's just kind of the mirror image. So in a human, glutathione is the primary intracellular antioxidant, and ergothioneine is the backup. And in a fungus, it's the other way around. Ergo is the dominant antioxidant, and ergothioneine is the backup. So one of the highest places of concentration of ergothioneine in the animal body is red blood cells. So it's, from what you've just said, I just realized that's probably the smoking gun in the answer to this question. So animals that are eating other animals and, you know, eating their blood, eating their liver, eating their kidneys.
Interesting.
You know, these are all places that are high in ergothioneine, and it also makes sense of the human cultures that eat blood. So, you know, you guys eat blood sausage, and I was always like, ick, you know, but it actually tastes really good.
It's amazing.
But there's a rationale for it beyond just the obvious, you know, iron. You know,
Yeah, that's the Helsinki. Anna Hein Borgman said to me and Nick there one day. She was talking, we eat blood sausages. She goes, oh yeah, we've blood pancakes, very something similar. And I was thinking, blood pancakes, gross. How to ruin a pancake?
I know you spat my coffee all over the computer.
There's no need for blood on pancakes, surely blueberries. But anyway, she said, oh yeah, we give them to dogs that have seizures. And I'm like, what? And she goes, yeah, she goes, I'm absolutely confident there's something in there that relieves seizures in dogs. And then when I looked into it, there's a whole heap of morphine-based compounds coursing around the blood. And I found 2 studies that found in cats in the zoo, it had doping-like effect on the cats in the zoo by feeding them blood. So there's definitely something going on. So she just noticed it by using it, and so the blood bit is very interesting. That's interesting. And we don't feed it to dogs. We feed bled animals to dogs. So there's not a whole lot of blood. The meat still can be red, but chicken, no, turkey, fish. And so you can actually buy dried blood online. It's an ingredient that really could be in more food if and we can buy it very, very cheaply. We can add it to the dog's food and they eat it with gusto. Dudley loves it. So yeah, there's something to that. Very interesting.
Yeah. Well, the ergothioneine piece is a really interesting part of that, because in humans that have low levels of ergothioneine, and this happens as we age because we don't eat enough mushrooms, it's very highly associated, and there's really good epidemiological data to support this, that it increases the risk of all of the neurodegenerative diseases. So, you know, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and mild cognitive impairment, vascular dementia.
And that's why you produced
this
product.
Yeah.
So,
and that's why we produce that product. Yeah.
So I was just going to ask, because we've talked about cognitive decline and things like that, you know, we could use this for. Is there other things, any CNS issues, you know, TIAs, you know, that transient ischemic attacks, that spasm of the vessels, vascular dementia is better than, you know, other types of amyloid deposition? What's the best thing that this will go for, and or does it just pretty much do anything to do with the CNS?
Well, it's much bigger than just the CNS. So it's a pleiotropic molecule in the animal body, and all of the cells, so, you know, humans and animals, have got transporter proteins to bring that particular molecule into the body. So it has all of the characteristics of a vitamin, but it doesn't kill you quickly if you don't get it. You know, like, you don't get vitamin C, a human will get scurvy and die very quickly. But if you lack ergothioneine, it shortens your lifespan and it reduces your health span. So you have more disease and you don't live quite as long. So, you know, if you just tweak that definition of a vitamin, it probably would fit.
Yeah.
So the role that ergothioneine plays is that it supports cells when they're extremely stressed. And inside a cell, glutathione levels will go up and down depending on the stress. So if you've got a place that's very highly stressed, then there's a lot of dynamic action going on. And if glutathione is in an oxidized state, then the cell is exposed to the damaging consequences of the reactive oxygen that is being produced. So ergothioneine exists in 2 forms. It's kind of like a clever antioxidant. And in a healthy cell where there's no stress, the pH is like, you know, 7.4 maybe. When there's stress, the pH changes ever so slightly, and that allows ergo to flick into its thiol form, which performs the antioxidant functions, and then it protects the cell while the glutathione is being regenerated. So it's a buffer, and it looks after all of the cells in the body. But there's a number of sites, like the retina in the eye, for example. Red blood cells have got very high levels of it because it controls the reactive oxygen action with oxygen binding with iron inside a red blood cell, the linings of the blood vessels. It's not just about the nervous system, but cardiovascular diseases are increased as well when you don't get enough ergothioneine. Older animals become more frail and more sarcopenic when they don't have enough ergothioneine. The lactating breasts of animals overexpress the ergotransporters, so ergothioneine gets delivered to the young preferentially. So there's a need for it in neurological development as well, which that area is not very well understood at the moment, but I think that it probably plays a really important role in proper neurological development. But just about any disease, there's research looking at all different sorts of things, osteoarthritis and improving sleep quality in aging animals.
Wow, Lee, this is absolutely amazing. This is kind of the vitamin that we never knew we needed, almost.
Exactly. Yeah.
But also, I was just thinking: are there peoples around the world who actually eat enough ergothioneine such that they have great longevity? Are there certain peoples that we could do epidemiological studies to see the advantages of eating mushrooms for longevity?
That's a good question, Nick. And there are a couple of studies on that, and they're not extensive. Like, they haven't looked at like the blue zone people that live well into their hundreds, but you can correlate the daily intake of ergothioneine, and in the US, it's estimated to be 1.1 milligrams per person per day, and it probably needs to be at least 5 milligrams to be healthy. And you could compare that with a population in Italy, for example, and the porcini mushroom, which is probably one of the signature mushrooms of many countries in Europe, is naturally very high in ergothioneine. And our early ancestors, if you go back 16,000 years, if you go back 50,000 years, our human ancestors and also our Neanderthal cousins, the archaeological evidence is that they were eating vast amounts of mushrooms. Yeah. So in Italy, they're estimated to be 4.6 milligrams of ergothioneine a day. And there's a longer, it's only a couple of years difference, but they live longer than Americans, for example, and they get less neurodegenerative disease than Americans. And when you put it on a graph, there's some countries like Finland and other things, there's clear associations with, the lowest levels of ergothioneine having the highest morbidities.
Wow. It's interesting. I'm looking at the food sources of ergothioneine here, and beef liver and beef kidney are okay sources of ergothioneine. That's where they get it from, and blood. So liver, kidneys, but oyster mushrooms have 5 times the amount of ergothioneine per 100 grams of fresh mushroom compared to 100 grams of liver. So based on the doses you were mentioning there, you'd have to eat a gruesome amount of liver. You'd have to eat, if there's 1 to 2 milligrams of ergothioneine in 100 grams of beef liver, so you'd be eating 100 grams of beef liver a day, whereas you could be enjoying far less oyster mushrooms and not really breakfast.
True.
So
plants, the plants also have some. So if you're human and you're eating red kidney beans and other things, but there's about 100 times less concentration in a plant. Plants get their ergothioneine from the fungus that grow in the soil.
Oh, wow.
And modern farming practices have disrupted that transition. So modern plants don't have the same levels of ergothioneine.
Wow.
Oh, that's interesting.
What about the seasonality of it, Lee? In that mushrooms tend to be kind of autumnal. So will it be that people are getting loads and loads and loads for 3-4 months in the autumn, and then and that may be preparatory for winter, which is a stressful time, cold, back in the old days, cold and starvation, or do they get enough then that lasts them through, or do they dry their mushrooms so that they can carry them through? I don't know.
Well, it's a bit of both, but I think from an evolutionary point of view, which kind of has created the environment that that we're talking about.
Yeah.
The ergo is clearly important to animals and particularly humans. And the fact that it's got a very long half-life, it's got a 30-day half-life. So a water-soluble vitamin like vitamin B has a half-life of maybe 20 minutes. You can see it in the toilet very quickly after taking a tablet. So I think our early ancestors would have, and Connor's deers would have gorged themselves on mushrooms when they were available, and then the body's storage mechanism would have retained it until the next flush, or the next season would have arrived. So
okay, so you can retain it. You can retain it for 9 months till the next the next season.
If you took 10 milligrams today, and you could radio label that 10 milligrams, in a month there'd still be 5 milligrams left. 5. Okay. So if you're taking hundreds of milligrams, over the course of months, then it builds up, and you've got this incredible reservoir.
Yeah, that's the same with. It's the same. Like I totally agree with you saying. Like the coenzyme Q10, for example, that's another antioxidant. Okay, and you can store it, and so you can eat it, and nutrients and these sort of things come to you in waves. I'm stuffing mushrooms into me because it's October, and that's when they see the deer or the female deer gorge on acorns and mushrooms. And you would store it in your liver and kidneys and bones and stuff. But the fact that coenzyme Q10, ergothioneine, and CBD aren't on the critical, it's not a vitamin, but it's still important. It's so obvious. It's hard to understand how it's not on the critical list of nutrients. You can't live without coenzyme Q10. If you stop eating coenzyme Q10, you will die soon. You need it for cellular energy and all sorts of stuff. Yeah. And so it's probably the same with ergothioneine. It's just because it's just not on this set list of vitamins, which have a whole heap of hormones in there as well, and minerals. It's who made that list? I mean, there's a whole range of compounds that aren't on that list that are utterly essential for life that we don't seem to talk about as much. They don't make the label.
It's a good point, Connor, and I think it's still early days in the science of ergothioneine, and there's a lot of data, but there's not yet enough to convince the bureaucratic boffins that control this stuff to make any changes. But another point that highlights ergothionine's significant entanglement in our evolutionary processes is that it doesn't only work as an antioxidant. In a healthy cell, it gets into mitochondria, and there's an enzyme in mitochondria that takes sulfur sources like cysteine, and it produces pyruvate and hydrogen sulfide. So in a mitochondria, ergothioneine speeds that enzyme up. I use the acronym MPST. It's got a really long name that's not that important. And in mice, and there's just the one study at the moment, so this is kind of brand new science, it speeds up the mitochondrial production of pyruvate that gets converted to acetyl-CoA, and that goes into the electron transport chain to make more ATP. And the hydrogen sulfide interacts with NRF2, which is the master regulator of antioxidant status in the cell. And I think the reason for those two things is that if you've got more respiration in the mitochondria, you need a little bit more antioxidant support to deal with the reactive oxygen from the improved respiration. So in healthy cells, you get more energy out of your mitochondria. So globally, your body's more vital and it's more capable of doing the work that the tissues and organs need to do. And in these mice, they ran just I worked out what the human equivalent dose was. I don't know what a dog equivalent is, but it was just 10 milligrams a day. And they ran 19% further than null ergo mice, and their maximum speed at peak velocity was 28% faster.
No, what? How much of this should we be taking this every single? Yeah, talk to me, Brent. And for those listening, Brent's skipping the whole thing. So,
I think 10 milligrams a day is probably a good dose. We don't know what the dog dose is yet, but I would think that you could, depending on the size of the dog, you could give a dog 1 or 2 capsules a week. And they've got the same biology as us; they would store it, so it doesn't have to be.
And I'm guessing if
every day.
If they're critically ill and under therefore an undue level of stress, then there's no harm to giving them a daily dose whilst they're in that critical phase. It's really hard to overdose on ergo.
Oh, it's impossible. Yeah, the scientists that did the overdosing studies, they gave up at 9,000 milligrams per kilogram.
Yeah,
They're like,
that's a lot.
We don't want to waste any more money on this.
Yeah.
So it's very safe.
So I know that Real Mushrooms have done a lot in their production of mushrooms to make sure that they're getting the best quality product out there in their things. Is there something that they're doing to enhance the amount of ergothioneine in the oyster mushrooms that they're growing, the golden oyster mushrooms that it says on the pack, or is it just naturally going to be at a steady state for those particular types of mushrooms?
That's a good question. And I think it's just based on simple Mendelian genetics. So golden oyster naturally produces high quantities, and you can just start looking at the different strains of golden oyster that are available. And if you're looking for a particular molecule like ergothioneine, you can grow the mushroom and test it. So varieties have been found that are like ridiculously high. Like nearly 10 milligrams per gram dry, which is just ridiculous.
Wow.
And that's where the focus is. And to put 10 milligrams on a label with a natural product is really technically quite challenging, because there's natural variation and there's stability issues with products that have to sit in a bottle for 3 years on a shelf. So a little bit of pure L-ergothioneine from a yeast source. So you can take the genes out of a mushroom and put them into a yeast, which is a different sort of fungus, and teach it to grow pure L-ergothioneine. So you combine the two together, you can get the 10 milligrams reliably every time you take a capsule.
Brilliant. And so and do Real Mushrooms also, do they test every batch? Do they make sure that what's on the label is there, or is it taken from the estimations that they first looked at, and then it's just repeatable, therefore they just put it in?
Yeah, good question, Brendan. Every batch is tested for those particular molecules. Every batch is tested for beta glucans, and the consumer doesn't ever see it, but there's a technique called thin layer chromatography, and chromatography in science is the art of separation. So if you mix the mushroom in some solvent, you can dissolve out all the chemistry that's in the mushroom, and there's hundreds of different molecules, and you can't ever identify them all, but you can visualize them using this chromatography technique, where you can create a visual representation, which is like a fingerprint. And then there's reference samples for mushrooms that are known to be good quality, and then all of the samples that come in get compared to that standard reference, so that there isn't any drift or deviation from all of the stuff that can't be measured kind of analytically, but can be visualized. It's a bit hard to explain that. But.
I wonder what else is in there. Like, we talk about ergothioneine now, but you can only imagine how many compounds are in there.
Oyster mushroom is pretty, I hesitate to use the word magical because it has other connotations, but it's got a lot of special properties, and there's quite a lot of clinical trial data in children, for example, just with regular oyster mushrooms and from a beta glucan point of view. And when you consume the beta glucans from oyster mushrooms, it decreases the number of infections that children get. It decreases the severity, it decreases the complications on quite low doses. So, if you've got young children, feeding them mushed up oyster mushroom, would make a lot of sense. But there are other chemistry elements in there that make it unique, and it's never about the one thing. And in my clinic, I use a lot of standardized products, but that just means that we're looking at one molecule and all of the other stuff is there. It's just that we need quantification so that we can get dosage right. So that's why ergothioneine is kind of standardized, so that we can have a more modern discussion around the use of it.
Can I give someone a quick tip on cooking oyster mushrooms? As a 10-year vegetarian, oyster mushrooms are these big ones with the big kind of floppy over, kind of like an open hand of a mushroom, and they cook beautifully on a pan in butter, okay? But leave them alone. So chop them, run down the middle of the stem and flop them onto the pan, bit of butter, heap of salt, and don't touch them, and let them caramelize to that kind of brown effect on each side. You don't need to keep stirring the pan, or you'll make softy, gloopy mushrooms. But when you do them like that and make these almost steak-like pieces of meat, they are the most meat-like of all plant. Well, it's not a plant, but you know what I mean. Of all non-meat items, it's the most meat-like. They're utterly delicious to eat and so good for you. So it's yeah. Anyway, there you go. Completely.
But he's never turned back from a bacon sandwich.
Oh,
Anyway,
I will agree with you.
Yeah, I can give you some tips on cooking a bacon sandwich too.
So that's a very good segue into Lee. Take us through your day or your week and your consumption of mushrooms, just as a kind of a ready reckoner for people to see how much mushroom and what type of mushroom that you're consuming or trying to consume each day, each week, each year. You know,
That's a good question. I'm clearly a mycophile, but even as a mycophile, it's hard to eat mushrooms every day. So, there's just
what you've got these for.
And that's why you've got the supplements. So I recommend to my patients that if they want to engage in mushrooms, appropriately, it's around 400 to 500 grams a week of a fresh mushroom.
Half a kilo a week.
That's quite a lot of mushrooms.
What is that? That's a 500 gram punnet. Yeah, you get that.
So
big punnet. Yeah,
it isn't actually that hard to do. You could just divide that into 3, and you could, if you made them the main meal in 3 meals, then 150 grams of mushrooms as a meat substitute works kind of well. But you get tired of it, like people need a bit of variety. And
you can make mushroom soup, or you can put them in your stews, and you can use them as a sideline, as opposed to this is oh no, Mum, not mushroom lasagna again.
Eat the mushrooms. Lee Carroll said.
So that's what my girls, which are my dogs at the moment, because my children have actually left home, probably because I was force feeding them things that they
healthy stuff.
Oh, brilliant. So you were actually in conversation with us over in San Diego, and there was some interesting snippets that I wanted to press you a little bit on, because so many of us reach for turkey tail when it comes to cancer treatment. And I think you were mentioning that actually there's so much more to mushrooms and different mushrooms for different cancers. Do you want to elaborate on that a bit, or is that sort of trade secrets and what real mushrooms are about? Are we allowed to touch on your discoveries about other specific mushrooms for specific cancers?
Sure. Yeah, it's a challenging conversation to have, because mushrooms have got various different types of beta glucans, and when we say beta glucans on the label, depending on the mushroom, there might be 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 100 different species of beta glucan that make up that quantity. And back in the 60s, scientists started looking at say shiitake mushroom, and they discovered that there was a particular beta glucan that they named lentinan, which was a small fraction of the total polysaccharides and beta glucans that were present. And they found that if they purified the extract and just got that particular molecule, so it's an expensive process that wastes a lot of the good stuff. So to just get concentrated lentinan, you've got to throw a lot of the good stuff away. They found that it was really highly effective at prostate cancer and also a range of gastrointestinal cancers, for example. And the trick is getting the concentration of those beta glucans to the level. So you need a more specialized product. And it would be wrong for people to think that mushrooms on their own would be an effective treatment for cancer. Mushrooms are fantastic for cancer prevention, and they engage all of the aspects of the immune system that are naturally designed to remove the development of any cancerous tissue before it becomes a problem. But in terms of supporting, an animal or someone with cancer, the research is pretty compelling that, all of the conventional therapies that would be appropriate for that particular cancer, the mushrooms make them work better, and they make the animals more resistant and more robust in terms of their general health, so that they can survive the treatment and, be healthier as a result of that, so the treatments can work better.
I think
so.
Go ahead.
Sorry,
Lisa.
can I go on?
It's just like, you know, it's such a cool thing at the moment, mushrooms, that people hear cancer and they start lobbying in mushrooms left, right, and center, but they don't realize what you're just after saying there is that certain mushrooms are better for certain cancers, and then there's a whole dose thing, and it really shows that for people that like me that don't know anything about it, it's like you need to get some advice. This is a really useful tool, so do pick brains of, if not Lee, somebody who knows that this is an enormous kingdom of useful tools here that can be used far more correctly than just lobbying in mushrooms because somebody said this was your anti-cancer blend, when research is showing there's specific use, like a fine scalpel. I think that's really
and a way to avoid that kind of conundrum is to be preventative, which is probably the hardest thing to ask someone to be. It's possibly easier with a pet because you've got control. When you're doing it for yourself, there's all of the the psychological stuff that comes in. So having a range of mushrooms like the 5 defenders that Real Mushrooms has gives you all of the different angles that the beta glucans have on the immune system in the body. And the science isn't really quite complete in this area, but I think there's a lot of pharmacokinetics going on when we consume the mushroom. So by pharmacokinetics, I mean, where do the beta glucans go in the body? What effect is the body having on these beta glucans when we consume them? And you look at a mushroom like cordyceps, and it's got an affinity for the lungs and the kidney. And how do you explain that? I think that the immunological tissue, say in the lungs, you've got very highly specialized immune cells that support all of the challenges that lung tissue has to face, all of the particles that get breathed in, all of the potential bacteria and viruses and mold spores and all that sort of rubbish. And I think the polysaccharides of cordyceps get internalized and have a greater influence over that location just because of where the immune cells, say the dendritic cells or macrophages, like or monocytes, move these things around within the body. So the science isn't really clear on that, but when you look at how mushrooms support different organs and tissues in the body, it makes sense to have a blend, and you do that blend on a regular basis to prevent the development of any health conditions. And then when conditions are observed and you need to treat them, then the dosage changes.
Okay, yeah.
So you would be having a higher dose.
Would you get enough ergothioneine from taking the 5 defenders as a daily supplement as opposed to going after the ergothioneine? Would you save the ergothioneine for when it hits the fan?
That is a good question, and I think the right answer is that there will be a little bit of ergothioneine in those other products, but not sufficient, to drive the equation. And I think a little bit of the Ergo Plus makes sense. And like I was saying earlier, with a dog, maybe a small dog 1 capsule a week, maybe a bigger dog 2 or 3 capsules a week, and medium ones in between would maybe be enough. But Rob Silver and I are discussing this topic, and he's trying to get his head around what the right dosing would be for animals.
Yeah, isn't it? It's like, how much antioxidant do you need in your storage if you're only drawing on tiny bits at a time? It's like, how much coenzyme Q10 do you need? Nick loves a bit of that in kidney disease. And, if you have some stored, is that enough? Is some enough? Can you keep loading up bricks outside the well-built house? It's like, like the coastal supplements.
Again, it's a pharmacokinetic thing. So when you consume ergo, it gets into your bloodstream, and then the tissues that it first comes in contact with are going to be the ones that maybe take it up. So maybe you've got to fill those up first before it spills over into more distant locations in the body. And we mentioned red blood cells. So red blood cells don't take it up in the blood, they take it up in the bone marrow and it gets built into them. But in the blood, neutrophils avidly take up ergothioneine, and in a neutrophil, ergothioneine helps to improve the oxidative burst that kills off pathogens, so it improves the killing effect that those cells have. So maybe neutrophils are sucking up a decent amount, then the liver will take up its portion, and then the endothelial cells in the vascular system take up their little bit. So I'm thinking that, you know, if you want to get it to places like your brain where it's got to get through the blood-brain barrier, so there's a more challenging kind of route of entry, then there needs to be slightly higher doses, you know, regularly, so that it can actually get there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it sounds really, really
I
good.
love it.
Lee, this is absolutely amazing information. I think people are going to be really excited about it. Would you stick around with us for a further 10 minutes? Could we please plow
Oh, definitely,
into
I'll
your
be
morning a little bit further? Because what
I'd
we
be
do
happy
is
to.
we're going to shut down now, and then we're going to go onto our Patreon. We have Patreon supporters who allow us to do what we do, and we'd like to give them a little extra 10 minutes. I would like to, within that 10 minutes, ask you about the beta glucans that you've talked about. What are they? How do they interact with the body? What are the receptors? And that whole area of biochemistry. Would you be able to give us a few thoughts?
Sure,
And
yeah.
I'm sure the boys have got their questions as well.
It's a fascinating topic. I'd love to share my thoughts on that.
Yeah.
That'd be amazing.
That's your website there, leecarrollherbalist.com, to check out what Lee's up to at the moment and get some reliable info. I bet you that this information is very, very confused out there, because there'll be a whole lot of people taking, it's like a new subject. It's like probiotics. Everyone's an expert, and then you realize you just know nothing. No, absolutely nothing. I've probably just been making a mess of it. But we are Raw Pet Medics. You'll find us on patreon.com/Raw Pet Medics. And thanks everybody on Facebook. I can see there's a lot of questions coming through there, so we can't get around to them now, but we might put them to Lee another time. But other than that, we will see you Patreons over.
I mean, wonderful, and thanks to Real Mushrooms who've come on and answering some of the questions themselves as well as we go. But I'm sure they'll be even more fired towards Lee for him to try and address. I'm sure it's been wonderful. Thank you everybody for coming on, and look forward to seeing you next week.
Lee, please come back and see us. This is just just too much information. It's so amazing.
And for those of you who want to follow up, if you just find us in about an hour on patreon.com/Raw Pet Medics, you'll see the last little bit that we've got of time with Lee. So catch us there. Cheers.
Amazing. Thanks, guys. And thank you, Lee. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I've loved it. Yeah, it's been great.